Hello there, you're welcome here again to Prep with Chigozie. So in this session today we're going to be discussing punctuation marks. Yes, we're going to be discussing punctuation marks because I've had a lot of calls and requests from students asking saying that they're still struggling with punctuation marks essentially. So in this class you're going to understand how the SAT tests you for punctuation marks, the tricks and the strategies they pull up to trick you into failing punctuation marks questions. Secondly, you're going to be learning the basic punctuation marks that are tested on the SAT. Yes, the basic punctuation marks that are tested on the SAT. So before we delve right into the class, I would like you to get your writing materials and just prepare to have an important write. Now, in the first place, what punctuation marks does the SAT often test you for? We have the semicolon. Yes, it is the symbol showing right on my screen right now. It is often confused with the colon, by the way, but they are both different and have almost entirely different functions, right, in class today. Secondly, the colon, yes, obviously, you're going to be tested for the colon on the SAT. And then we also have the comma, and finally, the dash. Notice that I did not mention the full stop. It is just so that the SAT regards the semicolon in the same light as a full stop. Now to begin the semicolon. The semicolon has two functions on the SAT. Two functions, not on the SAT. Because the SAT of course tests you for standard English convention. So by standard English, the semicolon has two functions, right? Yes. The first of which is to demarcate two independent clauses of related ideas. Now, I will take the time to really dissect this so that you really understand what I mean by independent clauses and what I mean by saying that both independent clauses have to have related. Clause is a complete expression that has a subject and a verb, essentially. But then it has a subject, verb, and a complement, a subject, verb, and an object, depending on the structure of the sentence. So an expression like bats are nocturnal creatures is an independent clause because we have a subject, verb, and a complement. So the subject in this case is bats, right? The thing talked about, the noun in the sentence talked about, and are verb, and the nocturnal creature, the complement of the subject connected by that verb are, right? So this is the case where the subject is a noun. You can also have the subject as a pronoun. So something like they are nocturnal is also an independent clause. They in this case is a subject pronoun, right? Yes. The very black creatures are nocturnal. The very black is a noun phrase. So you would normally have in English either the noun phrase or the pronoun function as the subject of your sentence or the subject of your independent clause. Now this is where the semicolon comes in, right? So you would have at the end of any of this expression a semicolon followed by a related idea which is also an independent clause. So I should have bats are nocturnal creatures, the semicolon, you can see that on my screen. They mostly hunt at night. Now you see, I have related ideas, the second of which explains the previous. The second throws light on the previous, and it is also an independent clause. So you see that, we have the semicolon between two independent clauses. Now remember I mentioned in the intro part of this video today that the semicolon and the full stop can do the same kind of function, not in all cases, in this case especially. So I could also have bats are nocturnal creatures, full stop, they mostly hunt at night after. So you see, the full stop is used in this case because it marks that the first sentence has ended and the second is another sentence, right? So your independent clause and the sentence are more or less the same thing. The only difference is in the full stop. If you use the full stop, you have a sentence. If you use the semicolon, you have an independent clause. By the way, the independent clause can come with a dependent clause. It can also be followed by a phrase. You're going to understand all of that as we progress through this class anyway, right? And you should also note that after a full stop, you should have a capital letter. So full stop ends a sentence. Your exclamation mark and question mark also end sentences, depending on the type of sentence, by the way. If the sentence is meant to be a question, who is there? Question mark, that is a sentence, but it's an interrogative sentence. So these are the only marks that end your sentence: your full stop, your exclamation mark, and the question mark. But on the SAT, you would find more often than not the full stop. But then know now that the full stop can come in the middle of two complete ideas, just like the semicolon can come in the middle of two independent clauses. Good. Now, this takes us to the second function of the semicolon. The semicolon can also be used to mark off items in a list. I will explain this, right? When do we say we have a list in English? We say we have a list in English when you have two or more words, actually three or more words in a string. We say we have a parallel structure in that way. An example would be, I love eating, comma, playing, comma, and dancing. So you see, that is a list. Eating, playing, dancing, right? And notice that I mentioned the comma as I read that sentence out. Yes, so the comma does that job essentially. The comma marks off items in the list. But then the semicolon can also do this function. But the semicolon does the function of marking off items in the list in a very peculiar way, which you would often find on the second module, because it can come in a very tricky way, right? Apart from what you already know of the semicolon, marking off items, demarcating two independent clauses, it can also be used to mark off items, but in a very tricky way that would often be asked in the more difficult section of the module 2. Now, how will the semicolon mark off items in the list? Watch my screen, and you may also need to write the sentence out. I love eating, comma, a very nourishing activity, semicolon, playing to make my mind active, semicolon, and dancing, another relishing activity. So you see what just went on there? I simply explained each item constituting my list with a phrase or with non-essential information. Yes, so when you have each item accompanied by a phrase or an example explaining it, the semicolon does the job of marking off instead. In fact, whenever you find the semicolon and the conjunction together in your text, if you find that the semicolon and the conjunction and together like that, this is often what is tested for. So you want to look for options that give you a comma somewhere to mark off a phrase explaining an item, and then a semicolon after before the next item of that list. Right? I'm sure this sounds a little complex, don't worry, we're going to understand this even better with an example I will walk through now with you. Now look at the question we have on my screen carefully. You want to take out a minute or so. You can pause this video right now and try working it out yourself, and let's see what you come up with. Here now, pay attention. Now, if you notice, we have the semicolon in the options. In fact, how you can tell that the question on standard English convention is a punctuation-based question, you would see that you have different punctuation marks with few words accompanied by few words. So we have parks everywhere, the same kind of words, but we have in one case a semicolon, in another case a comma, in another case the conjunction and. Now, let's see what works here. You want to know whether we have an independent clause before the blank and whether we have another independent clause after the blank. By the way, I'm going to explain what the dependent clause means when we move into the comma. But for now, you should understand that the independent clause is a complete idea, right? Made up of subject, verb, object, subject, verb, complement, makes complete sense. You're good with that, right? Good. Now, look at the sentence we have here. The Mission 66 initiative, which was important to read off non-essential information when dealing with punctuation, so that they don't confuse your reading speeds, right? So the Mission 66 initiative represented a major investment in the infrastructure of overburdened national parks. I plug in the words in the option at the same time. Now, if you notice, that is the complete idea. The Mission 66 initiative, in this case, is the subject of the sentence, a noun phrase, the subject. Represented, the verb. So you see, what is represented, of course, the complementary part of the sentence, a major investment in the infrastructure of overburdened national parks. So we see we have a complete idea. Now, what do we have after that? It prioritized physical improvement to the park's roads, utilities, employees, housing, and visitor facilities. So obviously we also have another independent clause after. In this case, the independent clause is begun with the it, and we know we can have a subject pronoun, right? So you see, so the semicolon option is the best in the list. Option C is our best option, because we can see both ideas are independent clauses and they are connected, the second of which throws light on the previous. That is the first function of the semicolon you've seen illustrated there. So hope this makes a lot of sense. Now let's move on to the second function of the semicolon, which is marking of items in a list, where each of the item is accompanied by an example or a phrase explaining it. Now the second example we have here, you want to take a pause on this video and try working out the question on your own, and let's see what you are able to provide. So yes, now yes, I think I did mention that whenever you have the semicolon and the conjunction in your text, just know that you're being tested for the use of the semicolon in marking of items in a list, right? So obviously that is the case here. Now, from the top of the passage, we have Nigerian author Buchi Emecheta's celebrated literary oeuvre includes the joys of motherhood. So they're giving us obviously a list of all of some of the fiction, some of the important fiction produced by Nigerian author Buchi Emecheta over time. The Joys of Motherhood, comma, a novel about the changing roles of women in 1950s Lagos. Remember, I tried to plug in the option too. So see, the first item in this case is the title of a novel, and we have the Joys of Motherhood and accompanied by a phrase, right? After that, we have, now we then have the next item, a kind of marriage. So that is the next title. Notice it's also written in italics. A kind of marriage, a television play about the private struggles of a newlywed couple in Nigeria. So obviously, we should have a semicolon before the next item. So option B is looking solid. It's looking like the likely answer. A kind of marriage, comma, a television play about the private struggles of newlywed couple in Nigeria. Semicolon and head above water, her autobiography. All of which are not fiction, by the way. Just so we have an autobiography which is not a fiction, but of course a list of some of her important works. So you see, so once you look at your passage and you have the semicolon and the conjunction and like this, just know, oh, I am being tested for this of the semicolon to mark off items in a list. So you go discover the patterns. Where is the item? Where is the phrase explaining it? Now don't always expect that each item must be accompanied by a phrase explaining it. In this case, all of the items are accompanied by a phrase explaining each item, right? But sometimes you could just have one item accompanied by a phrase, in which case the rule applies. The semicolon marks off items in the list, even in that situation. Hope this makes a lot of sense. Good. Now let's move into the next punctuation mark.